What if our tragedies were opportunities for triumph? In 1947, my grandparents, Roy and Malissia Clinton, got married in Eloy, Arizona. Jim Crow was alive and well, and times were tough for a young black couple with big dreams. My grandfather, the son of Arkansas sharecroppers, dreamed of life beyond the cotton fields. And my grandmother wanted to go to college at Prairie View A&M. She never made it past high school, but what they accomplished still blows my mind. My grandparents started Arizona's first African American daycare center, and they ran it for 35 years. They founded the Arizona chapter of the NAACP, and my grandfather was its president for years. They gave birth to 7 kids. The 3 girls came first, almost as if their sperm and eggs knew the rightful order of things. They marched alongside Dr. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, and they spent their lives fighting for civil rights. I absolutely adored my grandparents. Every year at Christmas time, I'd buy my grandmother a candle with a picture of a white Jesus on it. It was all I could afford from Smitty's grocery store at the corner of 106th and Butlong, where I lived in South Central Los Angeles. I knew that they were into civil rights, but to be honest, that didn't mean much to me. What I remember is that they owned a home on an acre of land in the desert, and they had a swimming pool. They were rich. But in the 50s and 60s, activism meant upsetting people and having the unimaginable happen to you. People threw bricks in their windows. They planted bombs under their cars. They tried to drive them off the roadway. And they called their house and they threatened their lives and the lives of their children. And almost as if to fulfill that wish, one day, someone walked up to their house in broad daylight, set it on fire, and burned it down. And my grandparents never spoke of this. I found out about this years later after they had passed by reading about it in a local newspaper. You see, my grandparents believed life was for living, not reliving. So with dignity and grace, they got up, they dusted off, and they rebuilt that home. I am the daughter of their middle daughter. Life for me was no storybook. My mom had me when she was 17, and she married my father under duress. For him, it was that or stare into the barrel of my grandfather's shotgun. And for her, it was that or abort me. And my parents loved me and my brother, but they were young and they were ill-prepared to raise us. Drugs were prominently featured in my life. My father dealt them. My mother consumed them. And then they'd fight. Repeat, repeat, repeat. And in that endless cycle, I wondered, what would life be like if I could live like my grandparents? I was repelled by the violence, the unpaid bills, the uncertainty. I wanted so much more. In the 9th grade, I made straight A's entirely by mistake. I didn't mean to, it just happened. And my high school gave me a book scholarship. Wait, what? They give you things when you get straight A's? So I set out to do that all 4 years, and I graduated and then went to college and then went on to law school, in part to fulfill the ambitions of my grandfather, who had risen to be the supervisor of the Civil Rights Division of the Attorney General's office in Arizona, but who had not obtained his law degree. In fact, I was a first-generation college graduate, and I was proud to make them proud. I got married almost 50 years to the day of my grandparents' marriage, and my husband and I, we set out to lead life in their image. After all, I'm named after my grandmother, who's named after hers. And my husband shared my grandfather's initials. And he reminded me so much of my grandfather. He had big hands like my grandfather with a little bit of ash right here, working man's hands. And he'd built a house for his mother, just like My grandfather had built that house with a swimming pool for my grandmother. And heck, I figured a man who could hang sheetrock was a man I wanted to have little chocolate babies with. So we had 3 children, each 3 grade years apart, and like my grandparents, we set about living the American dream with all vigor, working really, really hard. He as a pharmacist, me as an attorney, and we thought we'd finally made it when we got enough money together to move to Manhattan Beach. It was picturesque and clean. It had AYSO and basketball and football and baseball, legions of kids and parks and fields and lots of smiling faces. And of course we realized there weren't that many black folks. In fact, I remember driving home from work one day and I spied a black woman with 3 kids and I was determined to meet her. I zoomed up, stopped, rolled down the window. Oh, hi Rachel, Roy, Makai, Mom. It was my family and I hadn't realized it. That is not a joke. I was like, oh my God, I was mortified. What is this telling me? So for sure we realized there weren't that many black folks, but except for an isolated incident here or there, we felt welcome and we felt safe. On a typical Tuesday in February of 2015, my cell phone rang at 5 a.m. in the morning. I just arrived in DC late the night before for a business trip, and I was groggy and discombobulated. And it was Ron on the phone, and he said, honey, somebody set the house on fire. Yeah, he said someone laced a tire with gasoline and chucked it at our front door, and Ron woke to the sound of broken glass, and he rushed out of the room, saw that the door was on fire, gathered up the kids, the dog, and escaped through the garage, planted them safely across the street, and then ran back and grabbed a garden hose to try to put out the flames. And I remember him saying how eerily quiet it was. There were 5 fire trucks and as many police cars, and not a single neighbor outside, not one. And Ron said as he stood there, a fireman approached him and said, you seem kind of calm. Ron said, sir, I've got my kids looking at me. I've got to be calm if I want them to be calm. But I wasn't so calm, at least not on the inside. I was trying to figure out who I was before the fire versus who I was after, and I thought things that were really weird, like, so does this mean my kids need a police escort to school? Is someone telling me I can't go on solo runs in the morning? Where is that can of mace? I thought about my brother James Dion, who had urged me to move to the community years before, when I frankly hesitated because I wasn't sure we could get along, me with the fancy degrees. Dee said, Missy, it's not going to be like what happened to Grandma and Grandpa. Your kids are going to grow up in a new day. It's going to be okay. I thought about how my brother, my only brother and sibling, that same brother, was shot and killed by a white police officer on March 31, 2006. I begged God for a do-over. My only brother, I begged him for a do-over. So that, combined with the fire, combined with the day's headlines, really gave me a sense of foreboding and despair that it was never going to be okay. That after 500 years, we had not figured out how to get along, and we never would. And as if to confirm that suspicion, I reached out to Donna, head of security at my company. She knows everybody. And I said, can you please contact the authorities and find out what they know? And Donna forwarded the email she got back. And it said, I quote, in all caps, the fire was not an arson. It was not a firebombing. And it was not a hate crime. And later, Ron got called in to take a polygraph because, well, he just seemed too darn calm. And all of this was beyond frustrating. It was humiliating for a place we'd called home for over a decade. So at that very moment, we decided to move. I remember the conversation. Sure, we knew we were giving in to hate, but keeping our kids safe came first. So if we were being asked to go, we'd go. And maybe we would have moved, but over the next few hours and days, the unexpected happened. They say hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. Well, I'd like to revise that slightly to, except for the fury of a bunch of book club women. I emailed my book club and I explained what happened and I told them we were thinking about moving. This is in the wee hours of the very next day. And their response was swift and poignant. And I can summarize it in 4 words. You ain't going nowhere. They reached out to their contacts who reached out to theirs, and we started receiving emails, first 10, then 20, then 50, people expressing dismay and disbelief and anger and offering to help. I'd canceled my business trip and I was headed home, and as the plane taxied on the runway, the emails kept coming in. And when I arrived in LA, Ron called and he said, honey, there are news trucks outside of the pharmacy and outside of our house. And I thought, wait, what? 8 women did this? I went to the hotel where the kids were with the dog and my mom who'd flown in to be by our side, and the outpouring continued. We got more than 500 emails and texts. It felt like we were hearing from every member of the community, the greater community, co-workers and high school classmates, friends from college and customers of the pharmacy, black, white, brown, and plain folks who cared. Things started pouring into the hotel lobby, flowers and plants and cookies and brownies. Girl Scouts dropped off gift baskets. Meal trains were created. An entrepreneur named Peter Pham said, I'm going to organize a crowdfunding site. And he did, and it was for the reward fund, and it raised over $35,000 with over 300 participants. This was all within 48 hours of the fire. The police chief arrived, a dynamo of a woman, and the fire captain, a big bear of a man, and they said, let's do a do-over. Another friend named Michelle called and said, I'm thinking about organizing a vigil. Will you come? And we wanted to say no because, honestly, we're private people. But the outpouring was speaking to us. It was telling us to slow down and to listen. So we said yes, and we arrived at the town square 72 hours after the fire, still tired, still dazed, still confused. And promptly at 5 p.m., magic happened. People started flooding into the square from every direction by the dozens, and within minutes, the crowd swelled to over 700 people. It felt almost biblical, like God had dispatched his angels to comfort us. And the love was palpable. I love hugs, and a hug line formed, and people started hugging us and praying for us and crying for us and pleading with us to stay. They said the fire was not set by them, it was not of them, and it did not represent them. And at that moment, it struck me. God sent these people to restore my faith. They represent that better tomorrow my brother spoke of. Maybe he was right and I was wrong. Maybe we needed to stay and rebuild. I didn't wake up today and realize I was black. But in many respects, my children woke up to their blackness the day after that fire. Sure, they knew their skin color was black, but to them, it was just another color in the crayon box, equal in every way. After all they've ever really known is a black president. And in a way, their loss of innocence saddens me. But in another way, I thank God for it because I need my 2 boys to outlive me. And I need my daughter to have the choice to marry a man like her father, just like I married a man like my grandfather. So my children need to know racism is alive. They need to know how to get up, dust off, and fight against it. And I hope that they've added something even more life-altering to their toolkit. The knowledge that in the middle of every storm, they'll find the true power of God. And that sometimes He lets the terrible happen to give us, the collective us, the opportunity to do something extraordinary. My grandparents, Roy and Melissa Cooksey, knew that, and they spent 60 years of their lives fighting to put me right here in front of you at this appointed time. That's their triumph over tragedy. And maybe if we keep getting up, dusting off, and fighting for that better tomorrow, today, we'll be triumphant too. Thank you.